So, every few years, the US government puts out this thing called the National Security Strategy, the NSS. It's usually this super dense, formal document, kind of lays out America's game plan for the world. But what if it was something more? Today, we're going to dive into a really different take on the 2025 version, an interpretation that says this isn't just a policy paper, it might actually be a blueprint for events that were predicted thousands of years ago.
And yeah, that quote right there, that's really the heart of the whole thing. The core argument we're looking at is that this document, whether it means to or not, is setting the stage for what biblical prophecy calls the latter days. I mean, think about that. It's a pretty wild idea, right? That a modern government paper could kick off some ancient endgame? So the big question is, how? How is it supposed to work? Let's break down the key pillars of this whole theory.
All right, so the first big piece of this puzzle really zeroes in on Europe. The analysis we're exploring argues that this 2025 strategy completely rewrites Europe's role on the world stage. It's about pushing them from being, a dependent ally into a powerful, independent force all on their own. And right at the heart of this change is a policy they call burden shifting. Look, for decades, America has basically been the security blanket for Europe, the one guaranteeing their safety. Well, the 2025 NSS comes along and just ends that. It says it right there in black and white. Wealthy allies have to step up and take primary responsibility for their own regions. The training wheels are off. And let me tell you, the scale of this shift is just staggering. We're not talking about a small tweak here. The new strategy mandates that NATO allies have to jump their defense spending from a 2% GDP target all the way up to 5%. According to this analysis, that's basically putting Europe on a wartime footing. It's a massive, forced remilitarization. Okay, so this is where the theory makes its first huge leap. In politics, we call it burden shifting. Simple enough. But when you look at it through this prophetic lens, it's seen as something else, something much, much bigger. It's seen as the forging of that final world power prophesied way back in the book of Daniel, the revived Roman Empire. Now, if you're not familiar with that term, the revived Roman Empire is basically a prophesied European superpower that rises up in the end times. And the prophecy is super specific. It describes it as a mix of iron, that's the immense military strength, and clay, which represents all the deep internal divisions that make it fragile. So the argument here is that the NSS is literally creating the iron by forcing this rearmament, while all of Europe's existing political squabbles and social issues, well, that's the clay. Okay, so that's pillar number one, building up Europe. The second pillar shifts focus to Russia. And while Europe is being built up, the strategy takes a totally different approach with Russia. The analysis we're looking at has a name for it, the Magog Protocol. And this whole idea hinges on this really powerful image from the book of Ezekiel, this idea of hooks in the jaws. The thinking is that this great power from the north, which this analysis says is Russia, doesn't just decide to invade the Middle East one day. No. The prophecy suggests it's coerced. It's being pulled, dragged by circumstances that are completely out of its control. So you got to ask, what exactly are these hooks? Well, according to this theory, they're not literal. It's all about a strategic economic squeeze. Step one, the US floods Europe with its own energy. That immediately cuts off Russia's main cash cow, right? Their primary market's gone. Step two, Western sanctions are already choking their economy. So what happens? Step three, Russia is forced to pivot. They have to look south, toward the resource-rich Middle East, to find what the Bible calls spoil. So these hooks, they're pure, calculated economic desperation. All right, let's recap. We've got a rearming Europe and a cornered Russia. But what about the US in all this? What's its role? Well, the third pillar of this analysis looks at the absolute centerpiece of America's new defense strategy, and, you guessed it, its pretty profound theological meaning. This centerpiece has a name, the Golden Dome, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We're talking about a next-generation AI-driven missile defense system. The whole point is to make the American homeland completely, totally invulnerable. It's the ultimate high-tech security blanket, promising absolute safety. And the price tag? Wow. We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. This isn't just some side project. The analysis portrays it as a national obsession, a massive all-in bet on using technology to create perfect, untouchable security. And this is where the analysis draws another really sharp parallel to Scripture. The official goal in the NRSS is, and I'm quoting here, no adversary or danger should be able to hold America at risk.
Well, that language gets compared to the boast of ancient Babylon, which basically said, I'm untouchable, nothing can harm me, right? Right before it collapsed. The connection being made here is one of dangerous pride, hubris, plain and simple. And this ties right into a famous warning from the New Testament. The NSS talks a lot about achieving peace through strength, but this specific verse warns that when people start saying, we've got it made, peace and safety, through their own power, that's the exact moment when sudden destruction comes.
Okay, so all the main pieces are on the board, right? You've got a militarized Europe, a desperate Russia, and an America hiding behind this massive technological shield. So how does this analysis say it all finally comes together? What's the one thing that lights the fuse?
The analysis points to a single, specific trigger event mentioned in the strategy documents, something called Operation Midnight Hammer. And this is described as a massive, decisive U.S. strike that just completely obliterates Iran's entire nuclear enrichment capacity. Now, according to this theory, this one event is prophetically huge for two reasons. First, they see it as a literal fulfillment of an old prophecy in Jeremiah about breaking the bow of Elam, which is ancient Persia or modern-day Iran. But second, and this is the really critical part from a geopolitical standpoint, once Iran loses its nuclear card, it's not a major regional power anymore. It's weak, it's desperate, and it's forced to run to Russia for protection, creating that exact military coalition that's described in the book of Ezekiel. But this brings up a really fascinating question, one the analysis calls the targeting paradox. Think about it. If both the US and Europe are these massive world powers, why does this prophetic framework say that America gets neutralized while Europe sticks around to play this central role in the final act? Why one and not the other? Well, the logic presented goes like this. Europe, the Iron Tower, has a specific required role to play. It has to become the seat of that final global empire. So in a way, it has what you might call prophetic immunity. It needs to be preserved for the story to continue. The United States, the Golden Dome, on the other hand, is seen as the restrainer. It's the current global superpower that's kind of holding things in check. And for the new empire to rise, the old one has to be taken off the board to create a power vacuum. And you know what? This actually provides a potential answer to a really old prophetic puzzle. In that big invasion of Israel described in Ezekiel 38, why doesn't any superpower step in to help? It's always been a head-scratcher. Well, this America First doctrine gives a pretty startling answer. If the U.S. is safe and sound behind its Golden Dome, it'll just look at the conflict and decide it's not a direct threat to its interests. It becomes that passive merchant nation from the prophecy, the one who just stands by, maybe protests a little, but ultimately does nothing. So there you have it. That's the final chessboard, according to this analysis. Every single major policy in the 2025 NSS is interpreted as meticulously moving a key piece into its final prophesied position. You get a rearmed and independent Europe, you get a desperate Russia pushed to the south, you get a disarmed Iran forced into an alliance, and you get an isolated America withdrawn behind its shield. According to this view, the stage is officially set. Which brings us all the way back to the central provocative question. Is the 2025 national security strategy just a boring, pragmatic plan to protect a country's interests, or could it be something else? Could it be, like this analysis suggests, an accidental adherence to an ancient script? At the end of the day, what you believe, well, that's entirely up to you.